I'm speaking as a Marxist and therefore as a convinced atheist. I believe that human beings are capable of changing the world with no need for any God or spirit to help them on the way. Philosophically, Marxists are materialists, not in the sense that the average person would use that word in the sense of attached to worldly goods, but materialists in the sense that we believe only in the material world that exists, and not as, I mean, Lenin was in polemicizing in 1908 in his book on dialectical materialism and empirical criticism, refers to Bishop Burke in 1710, who raised the idea that it's thought that gives existence to matter. And of course, the idea is that the table here exists because we give it existence by thinking about it, and once we leave the room it stops existing. And of course, that would have been ridiculous to anybody. At the end of the story is resolved by the fact that the highest form of thought, the Spirit, God, is what gives creation to everything. So we exist thanks to his thinking about us. Now, we reject that kind of outlook and say the only real thing is the material world that we have. Now, there are many Christians, not all of them, of course, who, well, obviously believing in God, also contribute to attempting to change this world that we live in. And they do a lot of charitable work, and a lot of them are self-sacrificing and are not materialist in the sense that the average person would use, in the sense that they're not attached to the worldly goods and do attempt to do good in the world. But as institutions, the church or the various churches, we believe, do serve the interests of a class in society, a dominant class in society, and which would, I believe, probably contradicts the spirit of many of the people who adhere to the church. Now, I'm going to, I don't have lots of time, but I'm going to refer to two aspects. One is the God of the Old Testament, and as a good Catholic boy, this is my Bible from school. It's the Revised Standard Version of the Catholic edition. Very good. And this summer I actually spent some time reading my Italian version. Unfortunately, I didn't bring it with me because I underlined Leviticus because I thought it was wonderful reading. It's a terrible book, of course, because it's full of awful stuff that we have to do to people. But just to give it, I mean, if the idea is that Christianity and the book that it's based on, the Bible, right from the early days, is based on a God, a good, a merciful, a forgiving God, etc., well, the Old Testament doesn't fit that. I mean, it's clearly sexist, it's anti-homosexual, it's all kinds of stuff. Just one example in Leviticus 12, you know. If a woman has given birth to a male child, then she'll be unclean for 7 days. If she gives birth to a female child, she's unclean for 2 weeks. So if you have a girl, then the uncleanliness is stronger, which shows that the God of the Old Testament was clearly male chauvinist. And if you read through other parts of Leviticus, adulterers should be put to death. But if a man commits adultery with a slave, then they're not put to death, because the woman being a slave is not such a serious sin. And on homosexuality, of course, they should be put to death. Now, you just read the whole of Leviticus and you'll see that it is a wonderful read. It makes a terrifying read, actually. If you go to Deuteronomy, you find a God who supports his people in war. And I'll just give you an example. He says, when you draw near to a city, he's talking to the Jews, to fight against it, offer terms of peace to it. Sounds good at the beginning. And if its answer to you is peace, and it opens to you, then all the people who are found in it shall do forced labour for you and shall serve you. So if they surrender, you make them slaves. But if it makes no peace with you, but makes war against you, then you shall besiege it. And it goes on. And you shall put all its males to the sword. Therefore you kill all the males. I won't read the whole thing. And then he goes on to say that if you've defeated this people, who fought a war probably because they knew that if they surrendered they'd be your slaves. So I can understand why they would fight a war to stop you enslaving them. But because they fought you, and as God was on the side of the Jews, he helped them to defeat these people. These people were in a pretty bad state. Now, it says later on, if you found, I won't read the quote here, you can come and look for it, I want to be quick, but if you find a woman that's pleasing to you amongst the prisoners, give her a month to mourn the dead. That's probably because you just killed her brothers, her father, I don't know who else, her uncles, possibly sons if she had any, and you find her pleasing, you can take her as your wife, and then afterwards, if you don't like her, you can send her away. The only thing you can't do to her is make her a slave because you humiliated her. Now, this is the God of the Old Testament. This is the God of an ancient people, like all gods of the ancient peoples, who are called on by the ancient peoples to side with them in giving them some kind of magic power over their enemies in fighting wars. We have no problem with studying that, but the problem I would have is adopting it as a form of belief then guides me in my life thereafter. But it's not strange. I mean, I think the German soldiers had God is with us on their belts, the Christian God, and the people on the other side probably thought God was on their side too. And many wars have been fought in the name of God. In Northern Ireland we have a conflict between Christians, not even between Muslims and Christians, but Christians of the Protestant and Catholic variety. In reality, these conflicts express themselves through as religious conflicts. In reality, they express material interests of different groups in society, and in particular classes. But if we go to Christianity of the New Testament, which a lot of the stuff in the New Testament would contradict, the famous eye for an eye, and then it's no, turn the other cheek. There are contradictions there. But if you actually look at the origins of the Christians, you'll find there's a book actually being sold, the new edition. This is my old edition, Foundations of Christianity. And just to give you an idea, I first read this book when I was 17, and I was a Catholic, and I believed in God. So I don't think I read it thinking this is going to tell the truth and this is a lie. I actually read these two together, and I thought, I'm not going to take anything he says for granted. Every quote he provided, I went and looked it up in the Bible. And as I read, I found that everything he quoted was actually there. It was in the Bible, and it made sense. Just one little example, which I found interesting. Luke says, "Blessed are you poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you that hunger now, for ye shall be satisfied." Now that's clearly an indication that it's the poor who will be rewarded, and the rich cannot be rewarded. The rich cannot. In fact, the rich man can't even get through. Through the eye. The famous quote about the camel and the eye and the needle. In Matthew, you find a different version, which is, if I can find it, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness." That's justice. Now, you see, the Matthew version allows you to be rich, but poor in spirit, and thirsting for justice, but be rich. Whereas the Luke version is quite clear. If you're poor, you'll be rewarded. Not if you're poor in spirit. Now, there is a fundamental difference between the two terms. Now, Kautsky points out that where do these changes come about? Why is there a slightly different version within the different Gospels? Well, they were written at slightly different times. Christianity, to begin with, I was going to quote at length, but I don't have that much time. The point that Kautsky makes is that the early Christian communities were, they were spread, obviously, they were a Jewish sect, and throughout the Roman Empire there were Jewish communities. From that they spread beyond the Jewish community, and originally they recruited from the most downtrodden layers of society, the slaves, the poor, etc. And they were actually, he quotes examples where they used to mock the Christians for being that layer of society, incapable of recruiting wealthy, educated people who stuck to their previous pagan beliefs. But he points out that if the Luke version of the gospel is really that poor layer speaking with vengeance against the rich, you will be condemned, not us, the poor. We're the ones who are going to inherit the world that God has created at some point.